Karen stood by her kitchen window, watching as Jamal, her new neighbor, bent over a toy in the yard. The toy belonged to her children, a recent gift, and seeing a stranger handling it made her uneasy. Jamal, a black man, stirred an unsettling mix of fear and distrust in Karen, a feeling she couldn't quite shake. The stories of neighborhood break-ins and the constant media portrayal of crime flooded her mind. In a moment of panic, she grabbed her phone and called the police, reporting what she thought was a potential theft. Her voice trembled, and she couldn't help but glance repeatedly out the window, her heart racing as she awaited their arrival. As Karen hung up the phone, the reality of what she had just done began to sink in. She tried to justify her actions by recalling the crime rates in the area and the recent reports of suspicious activities. But deep down, a gnawing sense of guilt started to take root. Was she really protecting her family, or had she acted out of an unfounded fear? Karen paced the kitchen, her thoughts spiraling. She knew nothing about Jamal, yet she had immediately assumed the worst. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how hasty and irrational her decision had been. Her stomach churned with regret, but it was too late to undo what she had set in motion. When the police finally arrived, they approached Jamal cautiously, their hands near their holsters. Karen watched from the window, her anxiety mounting. But as the officers drew closer, they saw that Jamal was simply playing with the children, who were laughing and talking excitedly. The scene was completely innocent. The police quickly realized there was no crime and, after a brief conversation, left, leaving Jamal confused but unharmed. Karen stood frozen, horrified by the consequences of her snap judgment. She had assumed the worst about a man who was only interacting with her children in a friendly manner. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her, and she couldn't shake the image of Jamal's bewildered expression as the police questioned him. Her preconceived notions had almost led to a tragic misunderstanding. The incident with Jamal weighed heavily on Karen's mind. She couldn't escape the guilt and shame that had settled in her chest. Seeking comfort and advice, she met with her close friend Lisa at a local cafe. Over a cup of coffee, Karen hesitantly recounted the events of that morning, her voice trembling as she described her impulsive decision to call the police. Lisa listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to something sterner as Karen continued. When Karen finished, Lisa leaned forward, her tone gentle but firm. "Karen, you need to ask yourself why you really made that call. Was it about protecting your kids, or was it something else?" Lisa's words hit Karen like a punch to the gut. She had expected sympathy, maybe even reassurance, but instead, she was faced with the uncomfortable truth that her actions were driven by deep-seated prejudices she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Unable to ignore Lisa's probing questions, Karen began to reflect on her actions. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she knew about Jamal. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she decided she needed to understand the man she had so quickly judged. That evening, after putting her kids to bed, Karen sat down with her laptop and started searching for information about Jamal. She found his social media profiles and was surprised by what she discovered. Jamal was not just an ordinary guy. He was a respected businessman with a strong presence in the community. His posts were filled with pictures of charity events, mentoring programs for local youth, and initiatives to support small businesses in the area. The more Karen learned, the heavier her guilt became. How could she have jumped to such a terrible conclusion about someone so clearly invested in making a positive impact? Karen's investigation didn't stop online. She began talking to her neighbors, subtly asking about Jamal and his family. The responses were overwhelmingly positive. People spoke of Jamal as a kind, generous man who always had time for others. He was known for organizing community events and volunteering at the local youth center. Every piece of information she gathered painted a picture of a man who was the complete opposite of the criminal she had imagined. The realization was painful. Karen had allowed her biases to cloud her judgment, and it had almost led to a serious mistake. Determined to make amends, Karen decided that she needed to apologize to Jamal in person. It was the least she could do after everything that had happened. Days passed before Karen finally gathered the courage to approach Jamal. Each time she saw him from her window, the weight of her guilt grew heavier. She rehearsed what she would say over and over in her mind, but the words never seemed right. Finally, one afternoon, she saw Jamal working in his yard again, and something inside her pushed her forward. Her heart pounded as she walked across the street, feeling more nervous with each step. When she reached the edge of Jamal's yard, she hesitated, her voice catching in her throat. Jamal looked up, surprised to see her standing there, and gave a polite nod. Karen forced herself to speak, her voice trembling. "Hi, Jamal. I'm Karen from across the street. I need to apologize." Jamal straightened, clearly taken aback by her words. He set down the gardening tool he had been holding and gave her his full attention. Karen's palms were sweaty, and her voice wavered as she continued, explaining the misunderstanding that had led to her calling the police. She admitted her fears, her assumptions, and how deeply she regretted her actions. Jamal listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she finally finished, there was a heavy silence between them. Jamal took a deep breath before responding. "I appreciate your apology, Karen," he said, his voice calm but tinged with the frustration of someone who had faced this kind of prejudice before. "But you have to understand that this isn't just about you and me. It's something I deal with all the time. People see me and make assumptions based on the color of my skin. It's exhausting." His words struck Karen hard, and she realized just how much harm her actions had caused, not just in that moment, but as part of a broader pattern that Jamal had been enduring for years. As they continued talking, Karen began to see Jamal not as a stranger, but as a person with a story, with challenges and triumphs like anyone else. Jamal spoke about his work, his family, and his commitment to the community. He shared his frustrations with the systemic issues that led to moments like the one they had experienced, and how he tried to rise above them. Karen listened intently, feeling a deep sense of remorse for having contributed, even unintentionally, to the burden Jamal carried. By the end of their conversation, the initial tension had eased somewhat, replaced by a tentative understanding. Karen realized that her view of Jamal had completely changed. He was not just a neighbor, but someone with whom she shared more in common than she had ever imagined. This realization marked the beginning of a shift in their relationship, from one of mere neighbors to something more meaningful. After their initial conversation, Karen couldn't stop thinking about Jamal and everything he had shared with her. She felt a strong desire to make things right, not just with an apology, but by genuinely getting to know him and learning from him. Over the following weeks, Karen made an effort to reach out to Jamal regularly. It started with small gestures, a wave as she passed by, a casual conversation about the weather, but soon they found themselves talking more often and about more personal topics. Karen shared stories about her struggles as a mother, the challenges of balancing work and family, and her fears for her children's future. Jamal, in turn, opened up about his experiences as a black man in a predominantly white neighborhood, the obstacles he faced in his business, and his hopes for his own children. These conversations gradually broke down the walls between them, and what began as a cautious truce evolved into a budding friendship. One evening, Karen decided to take a bold step. She invited Jamal over for dinner with her family. The invitation was met with surprise, but also appreciation from Jamal, who accepted with a smile. On the evening of the dinner, there was a palpable tension in the air as Jamal arrived at Karen's home. Her husband, John, was polite but visibly unsure how to interact with Jamal, and the children were curious but a little shy. The initial conversation was stiff, with polite exchanges and a few awkward silences, but as the meal progressed, the atmosphere began to relax. Jamal's easygoing nature and sense of humor soon won over everyone at the table. The kids started asking him questions about his work, and John became genuinely interested in hearing about Jamal's business ventures and community projects. By the time dessert was served, the evening had transformed into a warm and engaging gathering, with laughter and shared stories filling the room. During the dinner, the conversation turned to more serious topics. Jamal spoke candidly about the difficulties he faced in keeping his business afloat, particularly the discrimination he encountered from potential clients and vendors who were hesitant to work with a Black-owned business. He described how he often had to prove himself twice as much as others to gain the same level of respect and opportunity. Karen and John listened intently, their expressions reflecting a mix of admiration and sadness. They hadn't realized just how much Jamal had to endure daily. This discussion sparked deep and meaningful conversations about racism, empathy, and the importance of supporting one another regardless of background. By the end of the night, the connection between Karen and Jamal had solidified into something more profound. A true friendship built on understanding, respect, and a shared commitment to challenging the prejudices that had once divided them. Inspired by their growing friendship and the conversations they had shared, Karen and Jamal decided to take their efforts a step further. They both recognized the need for greater understanding and unity within their community, which had long been divided along racial and socioeconomic lines. The idea of organizing a neighborhood fair came up, a community event that would bring people together regardless of their backgrounds. They envisioned a day filled with activities, food, and entertainment that would celebrate the diversity of the neighborhood. The goal was to foster connections among residents and to challenge the stereotypes and prejudices that had kept them apart. As they sat down to plan the event, the excitement was palpable. They discussed everything from the vendors to the performers, ensuring that the event would be as inclusive and representative as possible. However, as they started spreading the word and gathering support, they quickly encountered resistance. Some members of the community were less enthusiastic about the idea, expressing concerns that the event would attract the wrong kind of people or that it was unnecessary to focus on issues of race and inclusion. These objections were thinly veiled expressions of the same prejudices that Karen had once harbored. For Karen, these reactions were a harsh reminder of her past attitudes, and she felt a deep sense of responsibility to push back against them. She found herself in the unexpected position of defending Jamal and the event they were organizing, often having difficult conversations with neighbors who were reluctant to participate. Despite the challenges, Karen's resolve only grew stronger. Each objection reinforced her belief that this event was not only important but necessary for the future of their community. As the event date approached, the buzz around it began to grow. More and more people in the neighborhood started to take an interest, with some even volunteering to help. Karen and Jamal worked tirelessly to ensure everything was in place, from arranging food stalls to booking local bands and performers. The growing enthusiasm was a clear sign that their efforts were beginning to pay off. Karen felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a nervous anticipation. She knew that the event had the potential to be something transformative, not just for her and Jamal, but for the entire community. The closer they got to the event, the more she sensed that they were on the brink of something significant, a moment that could either bring the community together or highlight its deep divisions. As the day of the community event drew near, Karen and Jamal found themselves spending more time together, coordinating every detail to ensure its success. Their partnership had become a powerful example of what could be achieved when people put aside their differences and work toward a common goal. They visited local businesses to request support, seeking donations or sponsorships for the event. Some were enthusiastic, eager to be part of an initiative that promoted unity, while others were more hesitant, their lingering biases subtly influencing their decisions. Despite these setbacks, Karen and Jamal remained undeterred. Each visit, each conversation reinforced their commitment to making the event a success. They knew that their efforts were about more than just a single day. They were working to lay the foundation for a stronger, more inclusive community. During one of their visits, Karen and Jamal stopped by a local elementary school to invite students and their families to the event. As they walked through the schoolyard, they noticed something that struck them both: a group of children playing separately, divided along racial lines. Karen's heart sank as she watched the scene, a stark reminder of the divisions that still existed, even among the youngest members of the community. She realized that the work they were doing wasn't just about bringing adults together, it was about setting an example for the next generation. With Jamal by her side, Karen took the opportunity to speak to the children, encouraging them to play together and highlighting the importance of inclusion and friendship. The children listened, their innocent curiosity untainted by the biases that had shaped their parents' worldviews. This small but significant moment further fueled Karen's determination to make the event a place where everyone, especially the children, could see what true community looked like. As they left the school, Jamal couldn't help but express his gratitude to Karen. He had seen many attempts at bridging racial divides over the years, but few had felt as genuine and personal as this one. Seeing Karen take such an active role in promoting inclusion and challenging prejudices gave him hope that real change was possible, even in the face of deep-seated biases. For Karen, the experience was equally transformative. She had begun this journey with a simple desire to make amends, but it had grown into something much more profound. She now saw Jamal not just as a friend, but as a partner in a shared mission to reshape their community. This bond, forged through their mutual efforts, solidified their friendship and gave them both the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The day of the community fair finally arrived, and Karen and Jamal were filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The early morning hours were spent setting up tents, arranging tables, and coordinating with vendors and volunteers. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, people from all corners of the neighborhood began to gather. The turnout exceeded their expectations. Families, children, and elderly residents all mingled together, curious about what the day would bring. Karen couldn't help but smile as she watched people from different backgrounds interacting, laughing, and enjoying the various activities. The fair was everything they had hoped for, a vibrant, lively celebration of the community's diversity. It was a powerful testament to what could be achieved when people came together with open hearts and minds. Throughout the day, Karen and Jamal made it a point to share their story with those who attended. They spoke openly about the incident that had initially brought them together and the journey that followed. Their story resonated with many, sparking conversations about prejudice, empathy, and the importance of understanding one another. As they stood together on stage addressing the crowd, Karen felt a profound sense of unity in the air. The fair was no longer just an event. It had become a platform for change, a moment where the community could confront its biases and begin to heal. The atmosphere was filled with hope and a shared sense of purpose as people of all races and backgrounds came together to celebrate not just what made them different, but what made them alike. However, as the afternoon wore on, a tense undercurrent began to surface. A small group of individuals who had been conspicuously absent during the earlier festivities arrived at the fair. They carried signs and banners that were starkly out of place amidst the joyful atmosphere. The group was hostile, their presence clearly meant to disrupt the event. They began shouting derogatory slogans, their voices cutting through the laughter and music. The crowd tensed, the mood shifting from one of celebration to one of uncertainty and fear. Karen's heart sank as she realized what was happening. The fair, which had been such a success, was now at risk of being overshadowed by these agitators. She exchanged a worried glance with Jamal, knowing that how they responded in this moment could make or break everything they had worked for. The hostile group quickly made their presence known, their voices rising above the music and chatter of the fair. Their aggressive behavior drew the attention of everyone at the event, causing a wave of unease to ripple through the crowd. Karen felt a cold knot form in her stomach as she watched the situation escalate. The protesters were not just voicing their displeasure, they were actively trying to provoke a confrontation. Karen knew she had to act quickly to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. Without thinking, she pushed through the crowd and placed herself between Jamal and the agitators, her heart pounding in her chest. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice carrying over the din. "This is not what our community is about." Her hands trembled, but she stood firm, her eyes locked on the leader of the group. The tension was palpable, and for a moment, it seemed like the confrontation might erupt into something far worse. Jamal, moved by Karen's courage, stepped forward to join her. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before addressing the hostile group directly. "We're here to build something better," he said, his voice calm but strong. "This event is about coming together, about understanding and acceptance. There's no place for hate here." His words were steady, but the frustration of having to constantly defend his right to simply exist was evident in his tone. Jamal spoke from the heart, sharing his experiences and the challenges he faced as a black man in a community that had often judged him unfairly. He didn't just speak to the agitators, he spoke to the entire crowd, hoping to reach anyone who might still be harboring prejudice. The crowd around them listened in silence, the weight of Jamal's words sinking in. As he finished, a murmur of agreement spread through the audience, and some people began to step forward in support. The crowd's shift in mood was palpable. What had started as a tense standoff was now transforming into a show of solidarity. People began to surround Karen and Jamal, creating a barrier of support between them and the hostile group. The agitators, realizing they were outnumbered and out of place, started to lose their momentum. The community's united front left them with little choice but to retreat, their hateful rhetoric drowned out by the voices of those who stood for unity and peace. As the group dispersed, a cheer went up from the crowd, and the atmosphere of the fair slowly returned to one of celebration. Karen and Jamal exchanged a look of relief and gratitude. The crisis had passed, and their community had shown that it was stronger than the forces that sought to divide it. The victory wasn't just in the dispersal of the agitators, it was in the way the community had rallied together, proving that hate would not be tolerated. As the event continued, it became clear that the confrontation with the hostile group had only strengthened the community's resolve. The fair concluded with a powerful sense of triumph and unity as people came together to celebrate what they had accomplished. Karen and Jamal were approached by numerous residents, all expressing their admiration for the way they had handled the situation. Many thanked them for their bravery and for organizing an event that had brought the neighborhood closer than ever before. It was a moment of validation for Karen, who had feared that her past mistakes might overshadow her efforts to make things right. Instead, she and Jamal were now seen as leaders in the community, having shown that change was not only possible but also essential. The fair ended with a sense of hope and a renewed commitment to fostering understanding and inclusion. As the sun set and the last of the vendors packed up, Karen and Jamal found a quiet moment to reflect on the day. They sat together on a bench, watching as families slowly made their way home, children clutching their prizes and memories of a day well spent. "We did it," Karen said softly, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and pride. Jamal nodded, though his expression was thoughtful. "This is just the beginning," he replied. "Today was a victory, but there's still so much work to do. We've started something important here, and we can't stop now." Karen agreed, understanding that the battle against prejudice and division was far from over. The event had been a success, but it was only one step in a much larger journey. They talked about the future, discussing ways they could continue their efforts to promote unity and understanding within the community. Both knew that this was a long-term commitment, one that required ongoing effort and dedication. As they continued to talk, Jamal brought up something that had been on his mind. He mentioned a business rival from his past who had recently resurfaced, someone who had always resented his success and had tried to undermine him at every turn. This rival had never accepted Jamal's place in the business community, and now, with Jamal's growing prominence in the neighborhood, it seemed he was looking for ways to cause trouble again. Karen listened with concern, sensing that this rival could pose a real threat to everything they had worked to build. Jamal explained that while the community had rallied around them today, he feared that his rival might try to exploit any remaining divisions or prejudices to discredit him. Karen felt a surge of protectiveness for her friend. She was more determined than ever to stand by Jamal's side, knowing that the fight for justice and acceptance was far from over. Together, they resolved to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their commitment to their community and to each other. The creation of the community fair had barely ended when the shadow from Jamal's past made its move. Just a few days later, Jamal's old business rival, a man named Eric Reynolds, appeared at a community meeting, determined to undermine everything Jamal had built. Reynolds was a shrewd, bitter man who had always envied Jamal's success and charisma. He had tried and failed to sabotage Jamal's business in the past, but now he saw an opportunity to strike again. With the fair fresh in everyone's mind, Reynolds began spreading rumors, insinuating that Jamal was not as upstanding as he appeared. He hinted at financial irregularities, questionable associations, and even suggested that Jamal's efforts in the community were a front for darker activities. His goal was clear: to tarnish Jamal's reputation and turn the community against him. Karen, hearing these rumors, felt a cold anger rising within her. She knew Reynolds' accusations were baseless, but she also knew how damaging they could be if left unchallenged. As the rumors spread, Jamal found himself in an increasingly difficult position. Though many in the community stood by him, the whispers of doubt were beginning to take their toll. Attendance at his business started to drop, and some of the connections he had worked so hard to build began to fray. The situation came to a head at a town hall meeting, where Reynolds openly confronted Jamal, accusing him of being dishonest and untrustworthy. The atmosphere was tense, with many in the room unsure of what to believe. Jamal, usually calm and composed, looked visibly shaken. Karen couldn't stand to see her friend attacked like this. Gathering her courage, she stood up and spoke out. "This is enough," she said, her voice clear and strong. She recounted everything she knew about Jamal, his dedication to the community, his integrity, and the personal sacrifices he had made to help others. Karen also exposed Reynolds for what he was: a man driven by jealousy and spite, willing to destroy another person's life out of sheer malice. Her words were powerful, and they began to turn the tide of public opinion back in Jamal's favor. The final blow came when several members of the community, inspired by Karen's defense, began sharing their own positive experiences with Jamal. These testimonies further weakened Reynolds' accusations. Then, in a surprising turn, one of Reynolds' former business partners stepped forward, revealing that Reynolds himself had been involved in unethical practices and had a history of trying to sabotage competitors. The revelation was damning. Reynolds, exposed and humiliated, tried to deflect the blame, but found himself increasingly isolated. The community, seeing him for who he truly was, quickly turned against him. Eventually, Reynolds was reported for his unethical practices, and an investigation into his business was launched. The tables had turned completely. Jamal, who had nearly been brought down by a smear campaign, was now more respected than ever. As the meeting concluded, the community rallied around him, reaffirming their trust and appreciation for all he had done. Karen and Jamal, standing side by side, were celebrated as symbols of resilience and justice. Their friendship, born out of a misunderstanding, had grown into something much more powerful, a testament to the strength of unity and the triumph of truth over prejudice.